Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jack Marcel. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing for ARMIS. The topic of today's webinar is Zero Trust for Unmanaged and IoT Devices. What we're going to look at today is how enterprises have been steadily adopting the Zero Trust security model using a variety of security tools. But from the point of view of unmanaged and IoT devices, there are still some gaping holes that have not been addressed. And I'm going to show you what those are. And at the end of today's webinar, I'm going to show you how those holes can be plugged. Now, there's actually a lot of confusion about what Zero Trust actually is. So I'm going to take just a minute to explain what Zero Trust is and how it's evolved from the early days up until today. Anybody listening that was involved with enterprise security back around, say, 2005, remembers that this is basically how security was done back then. You had trusted devices located inside a trusted network, and all your important data lived inside the trusted network. And you managed all your trusted devices by putting security agents on them and patching them whenever a vulnerability was announced. And pretty much all your computers were running Microsoft Windows. But then a series of changes occurred. Mobility started increasing, and employees wanted to access data from anywhere, and the BYOD movement really blossomed. In 2013, the Industry 4.0 movement really started, and that entailed the blending of enterprise and OT environments, which opened up the attack surface for industrial control systems. Then cloud really started to become popular, and then now today we see a new trend. It's the growth in the number of unmanaged and IoT devices. Forecasters estimate that there's already more of these devices than there are traditional computers within enterprise environments. But the realization that there are security risks associated with these devices are just now really starting to occur. So in response to these changes, a new approach to security was born. And this was back in 2010, and it was evangelized by an analyst named John Kindervag at the research firm Forrester. And when you boil it down, this is really what it said, that no person or device should be trusted by default, no matter where it is, whether it's inside or outside your network. Instead, you need continuous monitoring of users and device behavior in order to maintain access to resources on the network. And the mantra of Zero Trust became never trust, always verify. All right, so that's the end of the look back in time. And from now on, I'm going to be just talking about the year 2020. Where are we today with Zero Trust? What approaches are enterprises using today? Well, the first approach that's gained widespread adoption is to add a much stronger emphasis on device controls. And these are all, of course, based on agents. Now, you still find antivirus agents, but now people are using agents that are designed for a wider range of devices, such as Android and iOS operating systems. And you see also endpoint threat detection tools, or EDR, are very commonly used. And this is really an acknowledgement of the fact that we can't perfectly protect every endpoint. So therefore, we need to constantly monitor the behavior of each endpoint to detect when it's been compromised. Now, I'm showing on my screen logos of 3 companies that provide these sorts of EDR controls. There's really many companies in this arena, and I'm not able to show all the logos, just a few that many people are familiar with. Now, the second common approach is network segmentation based on who the user is and the type of device. Rather than having just one big trusted enterprise network or even have specific trust zones within a network, we now use techniques to give just the right amount of network access. The third approach that enterprises have been commonly adopting is called visibility and analytics. Now, these systems are designed really to detect threats, and they commonly operate on log analysis and user behavior analysis. Again, here's a few logos of companies that many of you are probably familiar with. And the fourth approach is strong user controls. And that starts with authentication and authorization, and it also includes monitoring the behavior of each user. Now, in addition to these four main controls, there are three more that round out the total number to 7 of what's called the Zero Trust pillars. The fifth pillar is what's known as automation and orchestration. These kind of tools allow security policies to be enforced automatically, and they facilitate faster and more automated incident response. The sixth pillar is data security, and that's about discovering your data, classifying your data, and encrypting your data. And then the seventh pillar is really workload security, which protects application stacks in cloud compute environments. So altogether, a total of 7 pillars in the Zero Trust architecture. And what I'd like to do now is take a vote from the audience. At the bottom of your screen in BrightTalk, you'll see a tab that says Vote. If you have your screen maximized, you might need to press Escape to go back to the normal viewing mode. And the question for this vote is, how far along is your organization on the Zero Trust path? And the 4 answers are, we have not yet deployed any of the Zero Trust security pillars. We have deployed 1 or 2 pillars. We have deployed several key pillars, or we have deployed a full Zero Trust architecture. And while we're waiting for votes to come in, just have a couple of observations to share with you about this growth and interest in Zero Trust security. If you go out and you Google the term Zero Trust security, you'll pull up about 400,000 unique results, along with ads from a slew of security vendors. Market researchers say that the total size of the Zero Trust security market last year was about $15 billion, and it's expected to grow by 20% per year. Last little anecdote, when I was at the RSA Security Conference this past February, I saw that the Zero Trust conference sessions were some of the most popular ones. All right, let me stop the voting here, and it looks like things are pretty much kind of evenly spread here. Looks like 42% of my audience today says we have not yet deployed any of the Zero Trust security pillars. And then some of you guys, 28% have deployed 1 or 2 pillars, and 28% have deployed several key pillars. All right, well, thank you. That was kind of fun. Let's move on now. So I've talked about the 7 Zero Trust pillars, and when you implement all these controls, you wind up with a security architecture that looks something like this. At the top left, you have all the security controls that I spoke about. You have identity management, strong authentication, et cetera, for users. And then for managed devices, you have all the controls that were invented back in 2005, such as certificate management, and configuration management, and vulnerability management. Plus, you have additional controls added to that, such as endpoint detection and response, which is essentially a type of behavior monitoring. On unmanaged devices, which, as I said, are now very numerous, probably more of these devices on your network right now than you have managed devices. These devices don't accommodate security agents, and they don't support automated patch management systems like you see for Windows computers, and they don't typically generate logs. So the most that most enterprises really can do is to try and discover them using systems such as, for example, network access control. Now, all of this information gleaned by all of these security tools, it's generated and it flows into a set of tools that essentially provide Zero Trust enforcement and also security analytics tools. And the appropriate amount of network access or access to data will be granted to each person or each device. And finally, every enterprise also typically has some sort of anomaly response tool that's invoked when something goes wrong. Now, everyone should notice that there's something wrong with this architecture. At least I think there's something wrong. If you compare the controls that are commonly used for managed devices to the controls at the bottom that are used for unmanaged devices, you see that there's missing controls at the bottom of the slide. Where are the centralized configuration management tools? Well, you don't have them because you have so many different vendors and so many types of unmanaged devices. Where are the encryption tools? You don't have them. You're at the mercy of the device manufacturer, and typically device manufacturers design their devices for economy, not for security. Where's the behavior monitoring? Again, these devices don't generally produce logs, so none of the traditional behavior monitoring tools work for these devices. So to further drive home the point that a zero trust security gap exists today, which is the focus of today's webinar, let's take a look at each of the 7 zero trust pillars which are listed in the left column of this chart. So clearly, there are really good zero trust controls for managed devices. As I just said, $15 billion a year are being purchased. All you have to do is buy enough of these controls, stitch them together, and you're golden. But how about for devices such as HVAC systems, or printers, or industrial control systems, security cameras, and so forth? And how about off-network devices that use peer-to-peer protocols like Bluetooth and Zigbee? Examples of such devices would be a headset or a smart TV that has Bluetooth built into it, or any wireless keyboard. Well, these kinds of devices, they typically are not manufactured with security in mind, and they don't support agents, and they're impossible to patch or difficult to patch. Now, there have been many articles published over the years about the kinds of problems, security problems associated with these devices. So I don't think that anybody would argue with me that these devices deserve basically, on total, on average, a failing grade for the device controls pillar. How about network controls? Well, the problem here is you can't apply network segmentation if you don't know what the device is. Now, a lot of network access control systems rely on the MAC address bypass list, where you assume you trust the device, like, for example, it's a printer. You put all the MAC addresses of printers in this bypass list, and you just let them onto your network, and you do that with whatever you want on the network. Problem here is that MAC addresses are easily spoofed, very easy. Also, the average ability for network access control systems to correctly identify devices tends to be between 65 and 70% accurate. How about network scanners? Well, scanners can tell you about devices that are in the airspace that are running peer-to-peer protocols like Bluetooth. Now, the problem is that scanners are known to disrupt many kinds of IoT devices. It causes them to crash. Just ask any industrial environment to use a scanner within this manufacturing environment, and a lot of them will say, heck no, I don't want my system to crash. I tried that once. It wasn't good. Also, the scanners need to be programmed to scan specific network segments, so they're guaranteed to miss segments that you don't know about. And if you're relying on scanners, therefore, you're not going to solve the shadow IT problem. And of course, scanners run periodically, so they miss transient devices. So I'm going to be a little generous here. I'm going to give network controls half marks when it comes to unmanaged and IoT devices. And for obvious reasons, they completely fail to see or control any off-network devices. Now, the third zero trust pillar is visibility and analytics. And remember, this is really mostly about threat detection. Of course, EDR tools like CrowdStrike and Tanium, there's many of them, are in widespread use for managed devices. But agents don't run on the unmanaged and IoT devices, and the devices don't generate logs, as I said before. So all your log analysis tools will really be blind to what's going on these devices. And traffic analysis tools that look for kind of deviations, current traffic versus historical traffic, they lack contextual understanding of each device. And that really robs them of the ability to detect a compromised IoT device. How about security, automation, and orchestration tools? Well, the problem here is they're only as good as the information that is fed to them. And without good context, bad decisions can occur. Now, let me give you an example. Suppose you're a hospital and you find one of your security tools tells you that there's an IP address and it's probably somewhere in your intensive care unit and it's communicating with a known malicious external address. Maybe your firewall tells you that. Well, what automated action should be taken? Well, the answer is it depends on what the device is and how the device is being used. If you quarantine an infusion pump that's connected to a patient, the patient might die. So context is critical. Now here again, let me be generous. I'm going to give partial marks for unmanaged and IoT devices, but still no marks for devices that are off the network. As for data controls, here you are at the mercy of device manufacturers. Did they design the device properly? Typically the answer is no. Again, they designed for economy rather than security, and if encryption is missing, you can't add it later. Interesting little story here. In 2018, we did a study and we found there were over 500 million devices in enterprise environments that included unsecured, unencrypted, and unauthenticated protocols like HTTP to log in and manage the device. About 75% of all manufacturers produce devices like switches, routers, streaming media players, voice over IP phones, IP video cameras, and printers that contain these data security weaknesses. And they're vulnerable to being taken over by a technique known as DNS rebinding. And then it's really an old technique. It's been around about a decade, but it really can't be fixed unless you fix the devices themselves. And then in 2019, I read one day, my morning cup of coffee, I saw a story that hundreds of thousands of routers in Brazil were being taken over using this technique. So these devices are definitely not trustworthy, and there's really nothing you can do about it after the fact. Just basically you have to know what's there and then deal with them appropriately. Now, people controls are mostly about authentication, knowing who the person is. And in the world of, if you're just looking at devices, that means knowing what the device is. And that's really hard to do for unmanaged devices. It's pretty easy for an attacker to use MAC address spoofing to get onto your network and to bypass network access control. And most of your UEBA tools are used to monitor the behavior of people and manage computers, but they don't work well for unmanaged devices because these tools typically ingest logs, and the vast majority of unmanaged devices just don't produce logs. So finally we get to workload controls, and workloads really only will run on managed computers, so this rule doesn't apply to unmanaged IoT and off-network devices. So here we are at the end of the 7 zero trust pillars, and I've gone through each of them. I think I've made my case sort of like a lawyer in a courtroom that although there are a lot of good zero trust controls for managed devices, this is not the case for unmanaged and IoT devices or for off-network devices that use protocols like Bluetooth. So let's take another poll. This poll is, the question is, what are your primary security controls regarding unmanaged and IoT devices? And the 4 choices for this poll are, number 1, an attack could cause operational downtime. 2, the attacks could cause safety issues. 3, unmanaged devices increase my attack surface, which puts my enterprise data at greater risk. And 4th choice, I'm paranoid about anything that's unseen and unmonitored. All right, again, the voting is at the bottom of your screen there in BrightTalk. So while we're waiting for the results, I just want to say that customers come to Armis with all 4 of these concerns. We've had customers in the manufacturing space come to us when their production lines have been attacked. Downtime for a manufacturer is very expensive. There have been reports in the past of companies losing hundreds of millions of dollars. In the healthcare arena, we have customers concerned that attacks on devices such as infusion pumps could kill people. All right, let's see. So I have, looks like, probably I don't have too many manufacturing firms in the audience today. Looks like most people are concerned with safety issues, 42%, and concerned that basically the unmanaged devices are putting enterprise data or the IT system at risk because they would increase the attack surface. All right, thank you for that. So now it's moving on. We've seen that there's a problem. There's sort of an elephant in the room, a zero trust security gap. And now let's take a quick look at how to fix that gap. Well, Armis can solve the zero trust security gap. Armis is an agentless enterprise class security platform that fully addresses, or as fully as possible, addresses the zero trust security issue for unmanaged and IoT devices. Armis provides passive and real-time and continuous asset inventory, risk management, and detection and response to prevent cyber attacks from disrupting your operations or causing safety issues. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly step through each of these 7 pillars to give you just a glimpse at what Armis has to offer. Now, by no means am I going to really dive deep and be exhaustive today. If you want that, please contact us. Go to our website. We'll be happy to give you a personalized demonstration. But just quickly, let's start up at the top. The first pillar is device controls. Now, remember I said that unmanaged devices were problematic because they don't support agents. Well, it turns out if you build your security tool properly, put a lot of thought into it, as Armis has done, you can get tremendous visibility to unmanaged devices even without an agent. Armis identifies and classifies all devices, including your managed devices, your unmanaged, your BYOD, IoT devices, and off-network devices. We automatically generate a lot of information, as you can see here. And this information can be shared with other zero trust components, such as asset management systems and network access control systems, which would then allow them to apply proper network segmentation. But telling you what you have in your environment is really not enough. For zero trust security, you need to know whether the device represents a risk. Can you trust the device? Well, it's possible, even without agents, as Armis does, to analyze every device and produce some sort of a risk score, as I'm showing here. You can see that the total risk score here on this device we're looking at is 3, but it's based on multiple risk factors, some of which you might really care a lot about. And we generate all this information without ever touching or scanning or probing any devices. Again, as I mentioned, Armis is a 100% passive analysis tool, which means it's not dangerous and cannot possibly disrupt sensitive IoT devices. Let's move on to the second pillar, which is around network security. You might recall that the reason why current approaches to network security don't work well for unmanaged and IoT devices is because the network infrastructure typically doesn't know that much about each device. Sometimes these systems use MAC address whitelists and groups of MAC addresses, and again, the MAC address can be easily spoofed. Well, Armis fixes that problem. We provide extremely accurate information about what each device is, what vulnerabilities each device harbors, and what applications and what network services each device needs to access. And then we share this information with your existing network infrastructure, which then can perform the inline enforcement. A lot of our customers use ARMUS with their existing network access control system to do network segmentation. But if you don't have a network access control system, ARMUS actually has a built-in ability to work directly with your switches and wireless LAN controllers. The next pillar was or is called visibility and analytics. ARMUS monitors all network traffic to detect known attack signatures and device behavioral anomalies. We use machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques to detect when a device is operating outside of its known good baseline. And now this deviation could be caused by several different things as shown here. Could be caused by a device misconfiguration, a policy violation, abnormal behavior such as inappropriate connection requests. It could be caused by unusual software running on a device or some sort of threat intelligence that tells us that the device has been compromised. Now, once we detect a threat, we can take automated actions as shown on the right. Now, to do a really good job at threat detection, you need to do more than just compare current behavior to historical behavior. You need to also look at expected behavior. And how does this device current behavior compare to what's normative, what's typical, what's known good for that device? We know what to expect on day one, even without any learning period, because we have seen devices before, perhaps in other environments, other customers, and we know how they're supposed to operate. We actually store information about every device that we've ever seen in a cloud-based device knowledge base. Currently, it tracks the known good behavior characteristics of approximately 280 million devices, which makes it by far the largest such device knowledge base in the world. Now, moving on, the next zero trust pillar is called security automation and orchestration. Now, if you remember, my complaint here was that these automation tools know very little about the unmanaged devices. They have no context, so they could make poor decisions. Well, we fixed that problem in spades because we are the source of that contextual information. We can feed that information into your existing automation tools, or if you don't have automation tools, you can rely on ARMUS's built-in automation. And this slide shows the range of integrations that are possible with ARMUS. On the network, we integrate with all the major players, as you can see here, Cisco, Aruba, Meraki, etc. On top of the slide, you see that we have built-in feeds from the ARMUS device knowledge base and from our own research labs and from premium threat intelligence. On the right, we integrate with your SIM, with your CMDB, with vulnerability management systems, ticketing and incident control. And then at the bottom, we help you automate network segmentation and enforcement by using your existing firewall, your NAC, etc. Or again, you could work directly with your network infrastructure through those integrations, again, shown on the left side of the diagram. So where are we now in our list of zero trust pillars? Just to review, you've seen that ARMUS helps with asset inventory, knowing what you have, the first step in any good security program, along with automated device risk assessment. And you saw how ARMUS helps with proactive network segmentation by feeding information into your zero trust enforcement system. You saw that ARMUS can detect threats and anomalies based on the knowledge base, the device knowledge base that we have, the largest in the world. And I just ran through many different kinds of integrations that are available. So let me just cover quickly the last two zero trust pillars, and then I'll open up the line for questions. If you have any questions, feel free to start entering them into your BrightTalk user interface right now. I see that I already have a few questions, and if I don't get to all of them, I'll answer them after this webinar. So the next zero trust control is about data. What ARMIS does is we provide visibility into the presence or lack thereof of encrypted data transmission. And this really gives you information to help you make a decision about whether each device is trustworthy enough, depending on your use case. Let me give you an example. Suppose we see that one point-of-sale terminal within your retail organization is transmitting data unencrypted, but all the other terminals are transmitting encrypted data. Well, if we see that, we actually put up an alert. We detect that for you. You don't have to search for it. Or let me give you another example. Suppose we see that medical devices such as X-ray or MRI machines are transmitting unencrypted DICOM images. Well, we can show this as a risk associated with these devices. We continuously monitor the transmission of all devices, and we alert if transmission is unencrypted or if the data transmission volume, for example, exceeds the known good behavior. Lastly, let's get to people controls. Again, this is usually associated with who is the person, but in this case, it's talking about what is the device. And as I mentioned, ARMIS can really identify what is that device with a very high degree of accuracy. You don't need to try and put a certificate on the device. What we do is we compare multiple device characteristics with the device profiles that are stored in our device knowledge base. And these characteristics really can't be spoofed. It's things like how often are you communicating and with whom are you communicating. So finally, what ARMIS does is we associate users with devices on your network, and that really helps threat hunters and IT support personnel identify the names of users that might be associated with the device, associated with a smartphone, or even associated with a Bluetooth keyboard that's connected to a computer that's associated with a user. So there you have it. This is the ARMIS story in a nutshell. And let's do one more poll. It's our last poll. And let me make that active right here. The question in this poll is, which zero trust functions would be most useful in your environment? If you've already deployed some zero trust controls, then you might interpret this question as, which zero trust functions are already being most widely used in your environment, providing the most value? The choices are, number one, device visibility, which is giving you information about what the device is, where it is, what the risk score is. Network controls, such as auto-segmentation. Visibility and analytics to detect behavioral anomalies. Orchestration and automation for incident response. Or data controls, such as encryption or exfiltration detection. Unfortunately, BrightTalk only gives me 5 possible answers for voting, so I've left off the last 2 zero trust pillars, but I think that they're the ones that are probably least relevant, at least today's focus on unmanaged devices. All right, I'm seeing the votes come in. I think you're seeing them too. Looks like about 50% of my audience is most interested in detecting anomalies. That's interesting. If you take a look at sort of the market purchase quantities, and you kind of look at the different security vendors, by a small margin, the largest number of security products really are focused around device visibility, telling you really what's there and what your security risks are. All right, well, thank you for voting. That was the last one. Now, just before I wrap up and take questions, I want to refer back to this architecture slide. I said earlier that this is the kind of zero trust security architecture that's really commonly in use today. And in fact, at the RSA Security Conference back in February, I listened to a presenter talking about the amazing progress that his company's made in terms of deploying zero trust security. And his architecture was much like this one. There was a heavy emphasis on user controls, really very impressive what he'd done. Heavy emphasis on controls for managed devices, lots of security analytics, lots of enforcement points, but there was a large gap with respect to the enterprise unmanaged devices, which now, as I mentioned, are in some organizations, they vastly outnumber the managed devices. In most organizations, it about equals the number of managed devices. So this is absolutely an accurate diagram for most organizations. And what I went through in the second half of the presentation was really that Armis fills that gap, as shown here. We provide device discovery, asset inventory, risk assessment, behavior monitoring, threat detection, and security orchestration for all the unmanaged and unagentable, we use that word around here, unagentable devices that are in your environment. Armis is being used by many of the largest companies in the world, and again, if you want a live demonstration, just go to armis.com, click the button, and fill out the form, and we'll be happy to get to you right away. So that's the end of my presentation today. I hope you found it interesting, and let me answer the questions that have now started to come in. Let's see. I have a question here. Can Armis replace the need for a network access control system? That's a great question. What most of our customers do is they complement their network access control system with Armis. They've already got network access control in place. It's sort of their go-to security tool. And rather than sort of re-architecting all of their network access control policies, what they do is they make their NAC system smarter and give it better information by feeding the information into it from Armis. We have a few customers that never have yet adopted network access control. They think it's kind of overkill for what they need, and they are using Armis as a sort of a lightweight network access control system to direct different device types into different VLANs. All right, thank you for that question. Here's another question. How does Armis compare to CrowdStrike? CrowdStrike is an EDR tool. I guess I should say that there are similarities and also that there's differences. First, the similarities. Both Armis and CrowdStrike are designed to detect when an endpoint has been compromised. And both products share a history of information about what happened to the device, what communications occurred before the device was infected to allow threat hunters to research how threats move throughout your network. But differences, obviously CrowdStrike relies on an agent, and that really only works if you have a managed computer. You can't install a CrowdStrike agent onto a thermostat or a printer or a Bluetooth headset, for example. Let's see, have another question here. Can Armis secure the data on IoT devices? Great question. When an IoT device is designed, the engineers will either design them with security in mind or not. And usually the answer is not. So when they're on your network, there's nothing you can add to them to cause them to be more secure. You can't add encryption to them. You're really left with just a couple of sort of decision points. First, know what the device is and know what risks are inherent on each device. That's very hard to do unless you have an automated system such as Armis. You probably have hundreds of types of devices from dozens or hundreds of different manufacturers. So to do that manually would be difficult. But as I think I showed you, Armis helps with that by providing automated risk assessment, including the data security that's present on every device in your environment. Then the second thing you can do regarding securing data is just making sure that the device is configured properly Perhaps the device can transmit data in an encrypted fashion, but perhaps you haven't actually configured it to do so. Armis will tell you, perhaps it'll alert you. I gave the example of one point of sale terminal that was misconfigured and was sending data unencrypted. We can detect that, alert you to it, and then you can go and turn the encryption on. All right, let's see. One more question here. What kind of artificial intelligence and machine learning are you using to make your system intelligent? Lots of different kinds. We don't tend to use those words a lot in our marketing. They tend to be buzzwords that we try to avoid. What we do is we supplement our machine learning and our artificial intelligence with a lot of smart engineers that are creating a lot of interesting rules, looking at such things as groupings of systems, cohorts of systems, and detecting variances where one thing is an anomaly, again, possibly based out of a configuration difference. One terminal is not configured to transmit encrypted. It's that sort of application of machine learning and artificial intelligence that really gives our system the power that it does. I see no more questions. If you have any more questions, please enter them in. Actually, I would like to loop back to the first question. I just want to update my answer a little bit. The question was, can Armis replace the need for a NAC? I did want to point out a large difference between Armis and network access control, and that's in terms of risk assessment and threat detection. Network access control systems were designed to detect the security policy of a managed computer, and does that very well, typically using an agent or some sort of a remote scan of that managed computer. But network access control is not designed to assess the risk of an unmanaged device or an IoT device, can't even see off-network devices. And again, threat detection is really not something that network access control products do. They typically rely on other products like Armis or a firewall or something to detect a threat. Well, that's the end of the questions today. Thank you very much for attending, and that concludes today's webinar. Bye-bye now.